Hello and welcome to This is 65. My name is Erin Ackenheil and I own Black Point Insurance, where we help Medicare beneficiaries nationwide learn about the A, B, C's, and D's of Medicare, and we help agents and brokers learn to launch, grow, and retain their businesses. Through that process, we meet some incredible individuals, people who are authors, entrepreneurs, people who are in their encore careers, volunteering and supporting amazing causes, or combining a combination of all of that. All of them have inspirational stories and great information to share. And I'm really, really excited to bring my guest to you today. Alan Long is joining our show for the first time, and he's a retired CNA, or certified nursing assistant, amongst a variety of careers that he seemed to hold through the years. And he really learned a lot in his role as a CNA about hospital care today. And he has leveraged that experience and passion into becoming really an accomplished author, including books called Praying for Restraint and Less Than Human, 24 short stories and memoirs that have appeared in literary magazines. His books are available at Amazon, so go and order one today. But for now, I would just like to introduce him to you. Please welcome author, advocate, and teacher, Alan Long. So welcome, Alan, to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Erin. Thank you.
We're so glad to have you on and really just be able to share a little bit about your work. I know that you feel really passionate about improving hospital care today, and I'm looking forward to learning more and more about what your recommendations would be for there. But tell me a little bit about your background. I know you have a long and diverse career. How did the road lead back to author? So tell us your story.
When I was a kid, as soon as I learned what stories were, I would either make them up or memorize them and tell them to anyone who would listen. My little brother got the brunt of it.
And as a little sister myself, I know what that can be like.
Okay, when I was 12, I was in sixth grade, and my teacher took me aside. My English teacher took me aside, and she said, "Alan, you have a really good understanding of spelling, grammar, and punctuation. I want to make a deal with you." She said, "You can skip all the English lessons for this year if you just write me a short story every week." So that's how I got my start in writing. I wrote a short story a week for my sixth grade teacher, and I just kind of knew from there I wanted to be a writer.
What an incredible gift that she gave you by doing that, right? I mean, what a spark to,
I will be eternally grateful to that teacher. She was wonderful.
That's amazing. So, when I think about you, Alan, I mean, I know that you have really had a lot of roles in your career, not just author, right? You've been a CNA, you've done other things along your journey, and you have a big family and a lot of hobbies. And I guess my question is, like, how do you balance it all?
Well, I've been able to find time for everything. So when I was a kid, I had certain passions, and I still have all the same passions today. So when I was a kid, I'd love to swim, and I swam every single summer day at our local swimming pool from the time I was 5 until I was 18 and went off to college.
You really like swimming.
Yeah, and I was crazed to play guitar. I took lessons at 11, and at 12, I just became self-taught. Years later, I studied for 10 years under a master guitar player, and continued to do self-study. And now I'm studying again under a master guitar player, and I'm becoming an accomplished jazz guitarist.
That's so cool. I love that.
So those were two of my real passions, and I've had those passions all my life. And I had three sons and a stepdaughter, and My stepdaughter kind of hung out with my wife, but my three sons, I spent every waking moment with them um, when when they were kids, I just fit in my guitar playing and my writing when they were asleep or doing other things.
Right. So you managed to balance it all and really gave them your full attention, which is incredible. What a great dad you are.
Yeah, I loved it. I think I was a really good dad.
Yeah. Well, that's an accomplishment that I think everybody would like to put that label. So that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, well, as you've kind of gone along, you've been doing different careers, and I know you wrote the book Praying for Restraint, and that it really seems that you focused your writing on your work as a nurse in an inner city hospital. And I'm just kind of wondering what inspired you to focus on this topic?
Um, I think one of the main things is I worked for 6 years at an inner city hospital, and I said to myself, the things that I see are almost unbelievable. Almost nobody would believe me if I just explained what some of my days are like. And I just felt a passion to kind of share what my experience was as an inner city hospital nurse. And the other thing is, I saw a lot of large flaws in hospital care that I think are pretty universal. From what I've read, almost all hospitals, whether they're inner city or not, operate on a shoestring budget with extreme short staffing. And that creates a lot of danger to both patients and hospital staff.
Right. Why do you think it's like that? Why are they so underfunded?
Well, I tell you one blunt reason is that the less they spend on operations, the fatter the executive bonuses are at the end of the year.
Right.
That's really a true thing.
Wow, that's so sad. And you think of all the risk to the patient care, and obviously, terrible for the staff as well.
Yeah,
You know,
it's really bad, and I can give you some examples if you want.
yeah, please share some examples. I was just curious what it's like even working in the hospital system. What kinds of things did you see? What was it like?
Um, I think if I give you a few examples, that'll give you a flavor. So one example is I had a patient who sorry, I'm trying to just get my.
You're great. You're right in the center. You're perfect.
Okay, so I had one patient who went into surgery, and I was waiting for him in the recovery room. And he came out of surgery, and they couldn't wake him up, and he absolutely could not breathe. And a team of doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists gathered around him, tried everything they could think of as fast as they could to get him to breathe again. And finally, after they tried like a dozen or so different, techniques, they still could not wake him up or get him to breathe. And a doctor called for a certain scope, and a member of the recovery room staff says, "Oh, we don't have that scope. There's only one in the hospital. It's in the emergency room." And the doctor says, "Well, we need it right this second." And somebody said, "I'll run and get it." And they had to run from the recovery room to the emergency room. Luckily, the scope was not in use, or that patient may have died. And this person grabbed the scope, ran back to the recovery room, and they were able to use it to get the patient to breathe again. And I talked to the person who ran for the scope afterwards, and he said, "You know what? This happens all the time." He says the hospital is too cheap to buy a scope for the emergency room and one for the recovery room. And he says this happens all the time. We have patients who wake up and they can't breathe. And I said, "Well, what does that scope do?" And he says it allows for the very precise placement of a breathing tube.
Wow.
And he says we need this when we have to intubate a patient who can't breathe, and we don't have one. And he says we've been begging the administration for years for one.
Wow. That sounds extremely traumatizing, just,
Yeah, and
all around,
it's not common sense if you want to provide emergency care in a place in the hospital that has emergencies all the time.
Right. And I'm getting an idea of what it's like working in the hospital system. You said you were going to share a couple of other examples. Would you mind
Sure.
elaborating?
Yeah, sure. Well, here's a simple one. The hospital was always trying to find ways to cut labor costs, and so the hospital had a policy that there were certain patients that were almost guaranteed that they were going to fall. They were high fall risk patients. Sorry, I'm trying to center my head, but
You're good. You're good.
okay, they're high fall risk patients, and it could be someone who is unable to walk. They'll fall if they stand, and they're mentally incapacitated in some way, so that they're going to try to stand up anyway, and somebody has to sit there all day to make sure they don't get out of bed and stand up and fall. So anyway, the hospital one day got the idea that if they just took these assistant nurse sitters away from the high fall risk patients, it would save a lot of labor costs. And that they changed the policy to just eliminate these patient sitters. And the same day they changed the rule, a patient in one of the units fell and broke her neck.
Oh my God.
So, and then they changed the rule back the next day, but the hospital was just constantly looking for ways to save on labor costs.
Right. So when you share these examples, I mean, my initial reaction is this is really traumatizing. I mean, I can't even imagine watching a chase scene while somebody gets an equipment that's saving someone's life and changes being made at the drop of a dime that can affect somebody's life and their health. I mean, how did you personally cope with all this? I mean, you saw this day after day. How did you cope?
Well, you know what? When you're in that kind of environment, I've read that the best way to deal with it is just to talk to your peers about what you're going through, because they're going through the same thing, and they're almost the only people who will understand it and be able to understand what you're going through and kind of sympathize, and everybody can comfort one another.
Right. Absolutely.
So, can I give you one more example at least?
Oh, absolutely. Share one more with me, please.
Okay, so another example is there was an assistant nurse who came in to take the vital signs of a mentally ill patient. The patient was a violent psychiatric patient who was not sedated or restrained, and that was because of a hospital policy that basically said patients couldn't be sedated or restrained for behavioral reasons. And this CNA came into the patient's room and started to take vital signs. The patient leapt out of bed, knocked the CNA to the floor, and pounded her head against the floor. And there was the charge nurse for the unit was actually in the room, and she saw what happened, and she ran out and called the sheriff's department, but she was too afraid to go back in and rescue this poor CNA from having her head bashed against the floor. And unfortunately, this woman sustained permanent damage from this encounter, and I don't know the details of that. But the hospital, after that, she was gone for a while, and then the hospital put her on permanent light duty. So whatever happened to her, it was a permanent, some kind of permanent damage.
That's so awful. All of these examples, I mean, what they have in common is they all just kind of hurt me in my gut, right? Because it's just like that shouldn't be like that, and it sounds crazy. I can't imagine my loved one being in the hospital and experiencing that, and I can't even imagine what it would be like for healthcare workers in the hospital setting. When I think to your experience, Alan, I mean, you weren't always a CNA, right? You did other careers, and you came into this, wanting to do it, wanting to make a difference. you described some pretty traumatizing experiences, but just coming into this hospital setting after working in other types of businesses, what was your biggest surprise? Because you didn't really grow up in the hospital setting, in terms of your career. So what was
Yeah.
your biggest
Well, um, I, the bulk of my career, I spent 25 years as a high-tech marketing consultant. And so, I was used to working with businesses um, that just kind of did the right thing, and in general, employees were treated well and the environments were safe. And I just was shocked by how incredibly dangerous the hospital was, both to patients and to the staff. And I can give you one more example if you want. Is that too many?
No, please do.
Okay.
Never too
So
many examples.
okay. I've got more, but let me give you at least one more. So another example is um, um, the hospital had um, most patients had a roommate in on our hospital unit, but there was a couple of rooms where that could hold 4 patients. And so one thing the hospital did that was really dirty pool, and again, it was to save labor costs, but they would take the 4 worst patients on the floor, and a lot of times they were violent psychiatric patients who were not sedated or restrained, and they would put them in the same room with one CNA sitter whose job was to take care of them, all day long, and take, proper care of all 4 patients. And also, these patients were in many cases out of control, and the CNA had to make sure that they were safe, and also had to make sure that these patients didn't attack one another or get out into the hallway to attack other people. So I want to give you just one example of a day I worked in one of those rooms. Is that okay?
Please do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was sitting in a 4 patient room. My first patient was an alcoholic patient who we were drying out, and he was delirious. He had a broken arm because he'd fallen while drunk and he'd broken his arm. And he was in an agitated state of the drying out process. And he could not stay in bed. He could not stay in the room. And he spent the entire day running up and down the halls, trying to get onto the elevator. Uh, and I had to basically chase him through the halls all day long to make sure he didn't escape or he didn't fall and hurt himself. And every time I got near him, he tried to punch me. So, but that was only one of my patients. So another patient was a patient who had a severe back injury. And when I first came on duty, the patient's doctor came over to me and he said, "Alan, this patient has a severe back injury, and right now he's deeply sedated, but we're letting him come out of the sedation." And he says, "What I need you to do is watch him like a hawk, because if when he starts to stir, he says, you have to call his nurse immediately. He says, otherwise, if he tries to sit up or if he moves his head around too much, he could permanently paralyze himself."
God.
And so that's a patient who should have had a dedicated sitter, because the person, if he wasn't properly watched, he could permanently paralyze himself. But I had to
And you're chasing this other guy down the halls. How are you going to watch this guy?
chase the other guy up and down the halls, and I was terrified this guy would paralyze himself on my watch. So the other 2 patients there was a man who had a giant tumors, probably about the size of a grapefruit, on the side of his neck. And he was not a very steady walker. He needed help to and from the bathroom so he wouldn't fall. He was just really off balance. And then finally, the 4th patient was a mentally ill patient who was extremely violent, and he was handcuffed to his bed and under police guard.
Wow.
And at one point, they handed this patient a hot cup of coffee, and he threw the hot coffee onto the patient with the tumor.
Oh my God.
So it was just chaos. And at one point, as I was chasing the alcoholic guy through the hallway, I grabbed the charge nurse and I said, "You have to do something. That room is too much. There's a guy in there who could be paralyzed any moment if he wakes up and moves too much." And reinforcements never arrived, and I think that's because there weren't any. There was nobody available because there weren't enough CNAs on staff.
That's
And
so
I,
traumatizing.
I,
I can't
I,
even imagine. And the stress of thinking something bad could happen to one of these patients,
yeah, your stress
your
is
responsibility.
through the roof. You think somebody's going to get hurt, they're going to die, and you also think you're going to get blamed and you're going to lose your license and your livelihood.
Right.
I will tell you, I'm going to end on a positive note. I can give you more. I can give more examples if you want, but um, um, one great thing that happened while I was there was a doctor from a different unit. I can't remember. They were either a surgeon or an emergency room doctor who came up to our unit to follow up with a patient, and that patient had been placed in one of these four patient. I called them the four patient hellhole rooms. And she came to to follow up with this patient. He was in a four patient room, and she was so appalled by what she saw that she reported the director of our floor, who had created these four patient hellhole rooms. She reported him to the highest administrator in the hospital and to the California Department of Public Health, and instantly those four patient rooms were eliminated. But it took that doctor seeing it with their own eyes, and those four patient rooms had existed for years until that one doctor just happened to set foot in one and said, this has got to stop."
Right.
So that's a little happy ending to that one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good thing, first of all, the whole experience was so traumatizing, but I think what you're leading me to, Alan, is that uh, basically people can make a difference, right? This physician made a difference with her work, and I feel like you're making a difference with your writing. And I'm curious, when you wrote Praying for Restraint, what was your goal with that book, and have you achieved that goal?
Well, I I had high hopes for the book. I was hoping that, kind of best case, it would lead to significant hospital reforms. And I'd say about 3,500 people picked up a copy of the book. But they were just, everyday readers like you and me. And I sent emails to, nursing associations, hospital administration associations, just any about maybe six or eight different associations that I thought might like to have my book in their libraries, and I didn't get a nibble from anybody.
Wow.
And so I'm glad that I got a decent amount of readers, but I'm kind of disappointed that, as far as I know, it hasn't led to any reforms anywhere.
Right. A question for you. I mean, obviously, you sent your book to some of these organizations, talked about what it was, but who do you really think needs to hear this message to bring meaningful change? Like, who needs to hear that? And, I think people are inherently good. They want to do what's right. I think when they get the aha, it does bring about meaningful change. But who needs to hear it to drive us there?
Um, so I think the answer to that are people who are really strong advocates for hospital reform. And I'm not sure it's the hospitals themselves. Um, um, I mean, like I said, I worked at this inner city hospital for 6 years and saw almost zero reforms except for the 4 patient rooms being eliminated because a doctor stepped in and called the California Department of Public Health. And we had a woman who was hired as the hospital's chief nursing executive, and she wandered the halls when she was first hired, and she talked to a lot of nurses, including myself and some of my RN colleagues. And she said, "What is the biggest problem or frustration you have as a nurse here?" And every single person said, "It's the short staffing. It's just killing us, and it's unsafe for us and unsafe for our patients." And she said, "You know what? Every single nurse I've talked to has said that, and let me see what I can do about that." And she was there for 2 years, and there were no improvements on short staffing in any way, shape, or form.
Wow. So it fell on deaf ears a bit
Yeah,
there.
so I think that's what I'm trying to say. I think my book will fall on deaf ears, maybe with hospitals, both nursing staff and administrative staff.
Well, it probably just gets hard and they can't get what they need either. And then people tend to give up. It sounded like when it started getting the Department of Health involved, that's when actually meaningful change kind of.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact audience, but I think it's someone who it is in a real either employee safety advocate or a real patient safety advocate.
That makes a lot of sense. So,
Yeah, I just don't, I'm not sure that if hospital staff read the book, if it would create much change. It needs to be somebody who's going to really shake the tree.
right. I think they may relate to it, right? But they may not necessarily shake the tree from it, that type of thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's interesting.
And
So,
also, I'd like to say one other thing, in case your viewers are saying, "Well, this guy just happened to work at a whacked out hospital," and it's not like that in your average hospital. So I read a really good personal essay in the Huffington Post. It was about a woman who had wanted to be an RN her entire life, and she had gone to nursing school, become an RN, and she went to work at an inner city hospital. And she wrote about her experiences, and they exactly mirrored my own. And she resigned as an RN after 17 months and decided to give up patient care forever. And she ended up becoming a research nurse, where she interviewed patients for different research projects and never had to do patient care again. And this woman's dream was crushed within 17 months of her going to work at a hospital.
and it sounds like it's a global type problem. It's not isolated. So.
Yeah, so and I've read lots of articles that validate my experience also.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it sounds like, if I were to kind of paraphrase you, Alan, that, one of the improvements that would really help is proper staffing and funding for these hospitals. But I know you kind of have a good list, right, of recommendations for hospitals. And I was hoping that you could maybe talk me through the highlights. Like, what recommendations do you have? And what do you think the feasibility is of implementing some of those changes?
Well, I think my recommendations are pretty simple. It's just properly staff the hospital so that the workload for the staff is reasonable, so they can take proper care of their patients, and to give your staff the proper resources to do their job correctly. Like, if you have patients in the recovery room who constantly wake up and they can't breathe, and there's not that special intubation scope, there needs to be one. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me.
Right. Absolutely. So kind of taking it a step back is doing what that nurse did, that new administrator came through and walked the floor and found the things, but then taking that, mapping out a plan and implementing it. That's what was missing. So,
yeah, she was there for 2 years and did not affect any noticeable changes.
Yeah, that's
in short staffing or safety.
Right. In terms of other safety recommendations, what other things would you put at the top of your list?
Well, another thing is hospitals need to look at their policies. So, for example, the hospital where I worked had a policy that they super did not want to restrain or sedate violent psychiatric patients. And those patients, if they didn't want to stay in bed and they didn't want to stay in their rooms, they just wandered the halls. And we had a lady with really bad case of dementia, and she was wandering the halls, and there was a person visiting a family member, and they'd stepped out into the hall to make a phone call, and this dementia patient just fully attacked them, and the person, the nurses pulled this dementia patient off this person she'd attacked, and that family threatened to sue the hell out of the hospital if this patient was not kept under control. And so the patient was still allowed to roam the halls and was not sedated. And our job was almost impossible. We had to keep her off the hallway that went past the room where she'd attacked a family member. And at one point, she just said, I'm going to go down that hallway and you can't stop me. And I had to grab her by the back of her gown. And I said, you're not allowed to go down that hallway. And she just went berserk and started punching me and kicking me. And I called for help, and 2 or 3 nurses had to pull her off me and drag her down to her room. And then they had to sit in her doorway so she could not, leave her room. And what's really interesting is that patient, they were actually they were actually able to really turn her around so that she became a lot more normal again and was able to go live with family.
Wow.
But while she was in that state, before they had figured out how to improve her dementia symptoms, I think she should have been sedated and restrained if necessary so she wouldn't roam the halls and attack people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems really clear. I mean, not only was it dangerous for the people she was attacking, but it was dangerous for her as well, right? Something could have easily happened to her.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we had I'm going to give you one more example. We had a patient who was, I think her diagnosis was homicidal psychotic.
Wow.
If my memory serves. And she also was not sedated or restrained. She was able to wander the halls at will. And if you tried to make her do something she didn't want to, she would just attack you, trying to cause the greatest harm possible.
That's crazy.
It was basically where I worked. It was basically a psychiatric hospital where the patients were absolutely not under control at all, and it was unsafe for the staff and also for the patients themselves.
Right. Alan, when I think about you, I mean, I think of you obviously as an author, but an advocate and a teacher, right? Showing everybody what's going on here. And I guess I'm just curious, what do you see as the next step in your advocacy? Are you going to write another book? What's your path in terms of bringing this to the forefront?
That's a really good question. Being on your show here is I think a really positive thing. Here's the deal. When you're an author and you're kind of an unknown author, and you're, especially when you're writing a book that's not entertaining, it's not a mystery or sci-fi or romance or whatever, because those books tend to sell really well.
Right.
But if you're an unknown author writing kind of a memoir style book, that is the absolute hardest book to sell. And luckily, my publisher believed in me, and the book came out. And um, but when you're a little known author, um, it's almost impossible to get your book, have people know that your book is out there. And you can do this deal with Amazon where your book is free. The ebook version of your book is free for something like 5 days a year, and then you pay money out to advertise the heck out of it every time one of your free days is coming up.
Right.
And to be honest, that's how I got my 3,500 readers is from ebook giveaways. And I've sold some books on top of that, but almost nothing else works. Um, um, I tried. I spent a couple of $100 on a marketing campaign where I gave my book. I gave 10 copies of my book away for free on Goodreads, and then thousands of people signed up to try to get a free copy. And supposedly, if they don't get a free copy, your book sounded good and they're going to buy a copy. I don't think I had one person buy a copy of my book.
People really like free copies. Okay, Alan, that's the thing.
Yeah, I know. And, as an author, you only have so much financial resources, and your publisher, my book was published by a small press in Iowa, and they don't have the money to do big time publicity either. So there's almost nothing that works, and the author just has to fork out a lot of money to try to get attention, and it's really a tough game.
Well, Alan, I know my audience is going to want to help. So, what's the best thing they could do to help support you right now?
Well, I'd love it if they bought a copy of my book. It's available on Amazon. It's called Praying for Restraint by Alan Long.
So you heard it here, everybody. Please pick up a copy of Praying for Restraint, Alan, Allen, Alan Long, on Amazon. I know you're on there. Probably get it in the order in the morning, get it in the afternoon if I know Amazon, and a really good read, and learn more and see if you can spread the word and help, because the more we can support authors like Alan, the more we can live in a better, safer place. So I think that's really, really important. Alan, if people want to get a copy of the book, is the best way to go on Amazon.com, or is there any way to get copies of your book?
No, that's the best way. It's going to be super fast. The book is not expensive. I think it's $4.75 the last time I looked, because it didn't sell real well, and they knocked the price down from about $13 to $4.75.
The best bargain today, right? So
Yeah,
go and pick up a copy for sure.
It is a good deal.
If Alan, if people wanted to contact you, just about getting involved and learning more, what's the best way for people to reach you directly?
Just my email address is aalong5@comcast.net. And
Right.
I'd be happy to talk to anyone who's interested. One thing I kind of feel bad about is I was hoping my book would spark some hospital reform, and so far I don't think it's had any impact yet. And I'm super interested in any way working with anybody who might have an interest in reading my book and maybe either becoming an advocate for hospital reform, or also just making someone who's already doing that aware of my book.
100%. So, Alan, I just want to encourage everybody, for people who are out there who are advocates for good patient care in the hospital or passionate about this, part of our show is connecting those like minds together. So please reach out to Alan directly, so AA, Long, LONG 5 at Comcast.net. Perhaps reading the book can increase your awareness for the bargain price of under $5 these days on Amazon.com. And if you're a patient advocate out there today, hearing some of these stories, collaborating with people like Alan, let's get out there and make a difference. So, Alan, really appreciate you sharing that with us. And Alan, when I think about this, first of all, it's been great talking with you and learning more about what you do, from being a great dad to having a diverse career to just having all these ahas as a certified nursing assistant, and really just your passion when writing these books and really trying to make a difference. If you were to leave my audience with a bit of advice, 1 to 2 things that each individual person could do out there to make a difference, what would you advise us?
Related to the subject of hospital reform?
Yes, what could we do?
Well, I think it would be great if people could read the book and try to make hospital reformers, whoever they may be. To be honest, I'm not super well educated on who the best hospital reformer audiences would be, but just to try to make people who are interested in hospital reform aware of my book, its contents. And so hopefully my book will actually help improve the conditions in hospitals.
100%. So everybody, you heard it here. Get your copy of Praying for Restraint on Amazon.com. Get yourself educated. For all of our passionate advocates out there, read Alan's book and get connected and really get out there to make a difference. So Alan, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this is just the first of many stops on the Alan Long Road Show of promoting your cause, and really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And for everybody who wants to reach Alan directly, his email is up on the screen, aalong5@comcast.net. So Alan, once again, thank you. Have a fantastic day, and I appreciate you joining the show.
Erin, thanks so much. I'm so happy to appear on your show, and I just really appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. Have a fantastic day. Thank you,
Okay,
Alan.
you too. Thank you very much.